Hawkeyes Forever asks, can Indiana make it back to the college football playoff? That's the question. So Indiana made the college football playoff in 2024 with a combination of a great head coach who has a proven track record of success, who is under the radar, brought over most of his staff from James Madison, brought over several players from James Madison like Elijah Surratt, Michael Kamara, D'Angelo Pons, and many other players. Brought them all over from James Madison to Indiana, and Indiana started off the season a little clunky, as you would expect. Their opener against FIU was not exactly confidence-inducing, but then they just started beating people. And I remember the real wake-up call for me with Indiana when I realized this team might actually be something and not just someone taking advantage of a weak schedule. They did, as any team would take advantage of a weak schedule. But when I realized there might be some legitimacy to them is when they played Maryland. And they hosted Maryland. And Maryland is more talented than Indiana. Maryland's more established than Indiana. They lost a bunch compared to the Hoosiers, where the Hoosiers brought in a lot and returned some key guys like Carter Smith, Mike Caddick, for example. They even returned Taven Jackson, who played a bit when Rourke was hurt in the second half against Nebraska and when he was out for the entirety of the Washington game. But Indiana turned the ball over, I think, 4 times, maybe 5. And at the end of the day, before a garbage time touchdown by Maryland, they were up 42-21. When you turn it over 4 or 5 times compared to your opponent, and you still find a way to win by 2 to 3 touchdowns, that is a statement that you at least have some muscle to you. And then Indiana started flexing that muscle. And the peak, I would say, of their season performance was against Nebraska, where they won 56-7. It was a blowout. It was never close. You could tell from really the opening moment of the game that Indiana had Nebraska figured out and that they were the better team, both in terms of development, in terms of coaching, in terms of on-field performance. I mean, I would go as far to say they were even better culturally than Nebraska in year one, just like that. They were better. And then they put in their backup QB at halftime, still blew them out. Now, I think Cignetti's a really good head coach. Really good head coach. And I think Rule is a good head coach. We're not talking about Nebraska here, but when I mention those things about Indiana in comparison to Maryland or Nebraska, that's more of a testament in my mind to Indiana and what Curt Cignetti is, who he is, and the program that he's constructed even in just a year. Says more about him, I think, than any other team they played. And when they played Ohio State and when they played Notre Dame, they folded up like a lawn chair, especially against Notre Dame. Against Ohio State, they actually competed for a quarter. You could even say a half. And I think that the way they played Ohio State was, in a certain sense, better and also worse than the way they played Notre Dame. They had many more self-inflicted injuries against Ohio State than they did against Notre Dame. And all things considered, if they played to their ceiling, they probably could have played Ohio State closer than Notre Dame. But still, it was very clear they were in no way, shape, or form in the same room as Ohio State, let alone at the same table. So you learned some things from 2024. And I would say the takeaways from kind of my recap of 2024 that I just gave to you are Indiana can destroy anyone from just what they've shown us. Very skeletal, very transitive property, but bear with me. Indiana can destroy anyone who is at their talent level or a little bit better. And or, on top of that, anyone with similar coaching or inferior coaching, or maybe better coaching, but they have an inferior roster. You're talking about, in comparison to Indiana's coaching and talent, and all the teams who check any of those boxes I just mentioned off, you're talking about most of college football's teams. Most, if not all, of the G5 and a majority of the Power 4. That's why Indiana, in the analytics, is a preseason top 25 team. It's why a lot of people view them as a preseason top 25 team. They return enough. Cignetti did a very good job coaching. And they just, look, this wasn't 2022 TCU or 2015 Michigan State, for example, where those teams won a bunch of close games and they were well coached and they had some X factor players, but they also nearly went 8-4 or 9-3 or 7-5, or you get what I'm saying. Indiana, in no other universe, I mean, you re-sim the season, their average record's probably 10-2 or 11-1 again, because they were just that dominant. They were better than you cerebrally, mentally, physically, emotionally. I mean, you could even say maybe spiritually, the way that they played in many of those games and the way they fought. So you look at Indiana's schedule. The Hoosiers open up in week 1 against Old Dominion, then got Kennesaw State and Indiana State in week 2 and week 3. They then host Illinois, travel to Iowa in weeks 4 and 5. They get a bye in week 6. They travel to Oregon in week 7, host Michigan State in week 8, then host UCLA in week 9, travel to Maryland in week 10, then have another road game, back-to-back road trips. Big thing to mention. To Penn State, they travel to in week 11, host Wisconsin in week 12. They have a bye week 13 before traveling to play rival Purdue to close out the year. So how many of those teams are definitively better than Indiana talent-wise? And by definitively, I mean overwhelmingly so. How many of them? Well, I would say that you have 2. You have Oregon and you have Penn State. Those are your 2 teams that are definitively better than Indiana in terms of talent. Both have a blue chip ratio that is in anywhere from the upper 50s to, I would say, the 60s or 70s. Former Penn State, latter Oregon. Penn State returns 63% of their production. They got Jim Knowles in at DC, who's better than Tom Allen. It's a home game. Penn State hasn't lost to Indiana since 2020. You take that game out, they haven't lost to Indiana in over a decade. They haven't lost to Indiana at home in over a decade. And they haven't lost to Indiana overall in over a decade if you factor in games where fans are in the stands. Not saying that COVID was a fluke. There were many things about it that weren't flukish. There were also things that were. And Indiana that year only beat them off of a 2-point conversion. So that will be a hard game to win. You don't have the same, perhaps, mental disadvantage you do against Oregon, but Oregon is more talented than Penn State is. Their caliber of athlete is further ahead of Indiana than Penn State is, at least from high school. Developmentally and on the field, that might be a different story. And then the travel. That's really the most important point right there, is the travel. They have to travel, intuitively, I'd say thousands of miles west. Enter in different time zones. You have to travel 3 time zones over. And that might be a game where you move to a Friday. And that's a game that's probably moved to a night game, at least in Indiana's time zone. So think about the adversity Ohio State had to face when they traveled to Oregon. And then think about the talent disparity that Indiana has in comparison to the Ducks. But that's really it. Iowa and Wisconsin have better blue chip ratios than Indiana. But then again, Maryland and UCLA and Illinois and Michigan State probably do too. And Michigan State got shredded by Indiana last year. UCLA did. Maryland got handily beat. That was the game where they turned it over 4 times and still crushed them. They beat Purdue 66-0. Wisconsin last year was worse than Nebraska. This year will probably only be slightly better than last year's Nebraska, still similar caliber. I would assume that Iowa's going to take a step back power ratings-wise from last year. Offense should improve, but they lose a lot overall. O-line, running back, defense. It's going to be tough. And then Illinois brings a lot back, but they were not a special team in the power ratings. They weren't. I mean, they were viewed at 10-3 as still one of the bottom half Big Ten teams because they went 6-2, 6-1, 5-1, 5-2 in close games, depending on whether you count the Michigan game as a close game or not. They won by 14 points, but it was closer than a 14-point win. And then also, whether you count one of their losses to Minnesota or even to Penn State, because they were within striking distance technically with Penn State for much of that game, but it looked like for the whole matchup that Penn State was in a different galaxy, and Penn State's lack of a kicker at the time is really what prevented it from getting uglier. So can Indiana, the Hoosiers in the second year of Curt Cignetti, after they go 11-2, 8-1, and finish third in the Big Ten last year and lost in the first round of the CFP, but still having the best season in program history as recently as a few months ago. Can they return to the CFP? I think the answer is yes. Can they? And I will go as far to even answer Hawkeyes Forever's question that they will make it back to the CFP. A little bit of a bold prediction of mine that I will expand upon in the following months, following weeks. I mean, heck, it'll probably be expanded upon in the following week or two when Big Ten predictions of mine officially come out. Stay tuned for that, and make sure to hit the subscribe button, notification bell. Thank you, if you haven't already. And for your own benefit, if you yourself want to ask me a question and have your question and name be featured in a video of mine, join my Discord server via the link in the description and pinned comment, and type your question that you have in the hashtag YouTube mailbox channel. And I'll answer your question for you. I might. Not a guarantee, but it's likely, especially since it's very early still in the 2025 college football season. We haven't even reached kickoff yet, and I plan on doing this all the way through the regular season. Indiana, I think, can make it back. I think they will make it back. There are reasons to believe they won't. They lose a good chunk of their production, almost 40%. They have a change at quarterback, some changes on the offensive line. They lost CJ West, who was their highest draft pick, and I think a close to a freak at defensive tackle. Really impactful player. So we'll see what Indiana does to retool, reload, or if they have to rebuild at certain points. And this schedule, no doubt, is tougher than last year's, because last year they only had one road game that in hindsight really mattered, and that was Ohio State. Oregon's going to matter. Penn State's going to matter, even if somehow both of them were to drop off compared to last year, just because of their talent and their environments. They have to play Wisconsin. They have to play at Iowa, which won't be an easy test. Michigan State should be better. Illinois power ratings-wise should be better, and record-wise could even, have a type of season in terms of record that IU did last year and be really good. They won't sneak up on people like IU did last year because they're ranked in the preseason top 15 or top 10, but absolutely, Indiana can reach the college football playoff. They absolutely can. I'm going to go a step further personally and say that they will, because I already think Curt Cignetti's a top 10 head coach with a top 10 staff, and this roster is still loaded. It's not like TCU, where everyone came back in 2022. They got some key transfers, upgraded the staff massively, and then the following year went 5-7 because they lost basically everyone and had some coordinator changes. Indiana's only departure in their staff is Tino Sunseri to UCLA, and he was their co-offensive coordinator. They replaced him with an NFL guy named Chandler Whitmer, who worked with the Atlanta Falcons. They arguably, in terms of talent, have upgraded at quarterback from Curtis Rourke, who was operating with a half-torn ACL, which explained why he couldn't run the ball at all despite being an option quarterback at Ohio. They replace him with Fernando Mendoza, who's getting a lot of NFL hype. Roman Hemby is the best athlete at running back that Cignetti's probably had in his career. They returned both of their starting guards from last year, got Notre Dame's starting center, Pat Coogan, who wasn't going to start because he came in after Notre Dame suffered injuries on the offensive line. They returned Carter Smith, Elijah Surratt. They bring back Michael Kamara, who I think was an All-American caliber D-end. Aiden Fisher was mentioned as an All-American linebacker at times last year. They bring him back. And they also returned D'Angelo Pons at corner and safety Amari Farrell. So they still have a lot of players who were coached by Cignetti, not just last year, of which there are several, but also at James Madison too. And they brought in some good transfers who could have went and started at other Power 4 and I would say high caliber Power 4 schools. So Indiana can absolutely make a return to the CFP. This year, I actually think that they'll make it, as I've already mentioned, and they may have a better chance at winning a home game, because if they go 10-2 and the field is weak and maybe they play they play Oregon or Penn State close, maybe they can sneak in again and they'll be better prepared from last year. or if they somehow beat one of those teams and go 11-1, that's a much stronger 11-1 resume that could result in a home game, and then you're talking about an opportunity for them to even reach the quarterfinals, which would be insane. But the Indiana Hoosiers are absolutely college football playoff contenders this year. We'll see if they actually make it.